and I'm standing here at Palmer Station, Antarctica, a U.S. research station on the Antarctic Peninsula at 64 degrees south latitude. And we're really excited to bring you this broadcast from a penguin colony just across the water from here, and the chance to talk to a couple of scientists who you'll meet in just a moment. Dr. Josh Kohut from Rutgers University and Donna Fraser from the Polar Oceans Research Group. And throughout this broadcast, I'd like to encourage everybody to type your questions into the chat window, and we'll get to as many of them as we can and answer them specifically. You have to bear with us a little bit today. We are broadcasting from Antarctica. We're about 7,000 miles away from Cornell University right now. And it's pretty blustery outside. It's about probably 35 degrees and about 35 miles an hour of wind. So we found a sheltered spot on station, and we're going to hope that you don't get too much wind noise, and apologize for that in advance. To give you an idea of how this broadcast will go, we're going to meet the scientists here in just a few moments. We're going to take you on a little quick 360-degree tour of Palmer Station so you can get a little bit of an idea of where we're living here and how we're living. And after that, we will go over to Torgerson Island and view the penguin camera, and we'll start answering your questions. Once again, thank you for being here. Please do remember, when you write your questions into the chat window, we will answer those, as many of those as we can, and we will keep a list of them so that you don't have to worry about us forgetting about your questions. So there's no need to keep posting the same question over and over again and filling up the chat window. So thanks. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Josh Kohut. He's a physical oceanographer at Rutgers University. Josh.
Thank you, Hugh. As Hugh mentioned, I'm a physical oceanographer here on Palmer Station. This month, we're looking at how the oceanography, the temperatures, the salinities, and the currents affect the foraging behavior of the penguins that you're going to meet in this live chat and live stream. So I'm here. I'm excited to work with you, talk with you over the next hour, and answer any questions you might have about how we're trying to connect what the ocean system is doing to what the penguins are doing when they're out foraging to try and feed their chicks.
Great. And now let me introduce Donna Fraser, who is a penguin and seabird biologist who has been working, hi Donna,
hi,
who has been working here at Palmer Station for about 25 years and has seen many things over her time. And she's got a great insight into penguin biology and can tell you all sorts of Palmer Station history. So Donna, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about Palmer Station.
Absolutely. Thanks for the introduction, Hugh, and it's great to be here again today. Going to give you a brief tour of the Palmer area in a second. As Hugh mentioned, it is pretty windy here, so you'll get to see pretty much an authentic Antarctic Peninsula day. I work with the Seabird Ecology Program of the LTER, which is Long-Term Ecological Research, and we have had seabird research ongoing at Palmer Station since 1974. So we have about a 40-year history here total with our seabird research group. And it's fantastic to be collaborating with Josh and the Converge group. So I think we're ready to take our tour, aren't we?
Yeah, let's take
All right, so I'm going to spin you as gently as I can. All right, what you're seeing now, what you should be seeing now, is the Mar Ice Piedmont, which is a fancy way to say coastal glacier behind Palmer Station, and it actually runs the entire length of Southwest Danvers Island along the coast. The Mar Ice Piedmont is actually retreating at about 35 feet per year, which means that the glacier was seriously close to the station when it was built about 45 years ago. Continuing on, what you'll see here is Arthur Harbor, and Arthur Harbor is a place where a lot of visiting ships will actually anchor if they're spending a few hours for a tour visit or if they're spending the night. Arthur Harbor is obviously deep enough for whales and seals and other seabirds that we can see foraging around. And in the distance, you'll be able to see some islands. Some of the islands that are in the distance are Litchfield Island, which is a protected area. It was protected for the moss and the seabird communities and the plant communities. Torgerson Island, which we'll be taking you back to in a little while, is where we have one of our Adelie penguin study sites. And those study sites, I should mention too, those are the places that we access by inflatable Zodiac in order to do our work. So that is an important part of our day, is how to get around our study site safely. You should be looking at Palmer Station. Palmer Station was built, completed in about 1970. It was built by Navy Seabees. And prior to Palmer Station, we were over near Old Palmer, what we call Old Palmer, on Norsel Point. And that was actually an old British station. In fact, some of the names in this area, like Arthur Harbor and Norsel Point, Gamage Point, the Mar Ice Piedmont, all of those are historical names that come back from the FIDS, the Falkland Island Dependency Survey, which did a lot of work in this area when the British ran the station, Old Palmer Station. All right, so Palmer Station, the maximum capacity is 44 people. And those 44 people are made up of about half science, half support. The support is incredibly important to the work that we do here, and we honestly could not do what we're doing without them, because we have boat maintenance and computer maintenance and two absolutely amazing, phenomenal cooks that provide us with nourishment. And it's a relief not to be cooking. I'll mention that too. We also have skilled craftsmen and craftspeople that keep the station running. You'll see the carpentry shop right in front of us there. When things break, there is somebody here who is skilled to fix it. The closest hardware store is 800 miles away, so that requires a lot of careful planning and also having skilled members in the community. I'm going to swing around a little bit more here. You'll see Bonaparte Point. Bonaparte is the closest bit of land to us, and it's open for people to go hiking and walking around. And in the distance, I'm hoping that you will see a very large iceberg. And I'm getting to them. Iceberg is about a mile from station right now, and because there's between 70 and 90% of icebergs are underwater, you can imagine how big that is, because it is about 70, what did we decide? 90 feet high. So it is an enormous chunk of ice that's been there for a while. Continuing on, there's our pit crew. Hello, hello. Thank you very much. Again, and they are helping answer questions and driving the penguin cam around with an actual penguin. Fantastic. Let's see, and I think I am almost back to here.
Great. Thank you, Donna,
No
for
worries.
that. So now you've been acquainted with Palmer Station a little bit, and just to reiterate how isolated we are here at Palmer Station, we are on sort of the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. We're about 800 miles, or about 700 miles south of Punta Arenas, Chile, at the very tip of South America here. It takes about 6 days on a good day on the ship that brings us down here just to get here, and there's no airstrip or air service here, so we are a little bit cut off. We do need to bring everything that we need. I just want to ask a couple more questions of the scientists before and give you guys some time to enter questions if you have them for the scientists, and then we'll go over and take a look at Torgerson Island and the penguins. So the thing I wanted to ask Josh was what gave you the idea, as a physical oceanographer, you study water, to get hooked up and do work with penguin biologists?
It's a good question, Hugh. It's something that I'm very interested in for my research. I've worked quite a bit in other places around the world on fisheries questions, and we recognize that fish, just like penguins, are using the ocean for their habitat, and they're navigating through a lot of different areas. They're trying to figure out where the food is, where to be protected from predators, and all that is related to what the physical ocean looks like, where the temperature breaks are, where the salinity is changing, where the currents might be concentrating food that the penguins are looking for or fish are looking for, or whatever that question is. So when I learned about the great research that was being done by Polar Oceans Research Group and a project that happened about 3 years ago with Dr. Matt Oliver as the lead, we got to see how connected the penguins might be to the ocean, and it really gave us this idea of how we could bring the technology along with the technologies that Donna and her research team are using to track and understand the penguins themselves.
Yeah, and I could mention that if you look underneath your video stream on the page, you'll see some supplementary material and also a link to the project blog that I've been writing along with the photography of Chris Linder, who you just saw on the computer over there. And that explains how some of this research is done and some of the technology that's involved with using robotic underwater gliders that go out to where the penguins have been and sample the water conditions there. So maybe not while you're watching this stream, but afterwards, if you're interested, you can click over there and learn all you wanted to know about gliders.
Yeah.
I wanted to also ask Donna if you can just kind of explain how a day goes at Palmer Station. How do you kind of do your work? You mentioned zodiacs earlier. Explain what those are.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a good point to go into our day a little bit. Up and around by about 7 o'clock in the morning. And what we do first is most important, as you can see on a day like today, is that we assess the weather and the conditions. We try and match up good weather with our very long do list of things that we have to do. And we try and get out to various islands to do our tasks like chick weights and measurements and transmitter deployments or retrievals. We do some stomach lavage for diet sampling to see what the birds are eating. And it can be a very long list. We always pack lunch. We always have our safety gear on board. Zodiacs are inflatable boats, so they're about 15 feet long, and we can actually fit everyone our safety gear, lunches, and snacks so that we can be out and about for quite a while.
Hot tea.
And
right?
hot tea, absolutely hot tea.
Yeah, you go to about how many islands?
We have about 21 islands in this area that we work on, and so...
And not just Adelie penguins, but...
Not just Adelie penguins, 3 types of penguins. So we work with Adelies, chinstraps, and Gentoo penguins. We also work with South blue-eyed shags and kelp gulls. So the list can be very long on some days of things that we have to get done.
Yeah, so there are only about 12 species of birds that regularly occur right around Palmer Station, and Donna and her team work on most of those.
We know what they're up to. Yeah.
Right. Great. Well, let's make a little transition over here and take a look at what's going on at Torgerson Island, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the research.
Absolutely, that sounds fantastic.
All right, so just bear with us for a second. We're gonna fade in a little shot of the penguins, and with any luck, you'll be able to see a little box in the corner of your screen with your scientists.
Okay. All right, maybe.
Okay, you want to switch sides?
No,
because I can see better on this side.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, wait. Actually, no.
Bear with us. It's a little bit of a bright day out here.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So what you're looking at now is a view from Torgerson Island back looking at Palmer Station. And we are on the deck of the taller building in the back. So Torgerson Island sits approximately a half mile from station. And it's like I mentioned, it's one of the sites of our penguin research. So you can see an Adelie colony down in the foreground, and I can see an Adelie moving, walking along. And just now a brown skua flew through the frame. So watch for skuas and watch for Adelie penguins, and we'll also talk a little bit more about the behaviors that you'll be seeing from the chicks and the adults. So I think we could change the view now if that's possible.
What these penguins,
thinking.
How big they are,
Absolutely.
How long they live.
Okay, so Adelie penguins are one of the 3 pygosalid penguins, the brush-tailed penguins, that we have in this area. Adelie penguins weigh between 10 and 12 pounds. That's 4 to 5 or 4 to 5.5 kilos or so. And they stand about 18 inches tall. Now, the Adelie penguins are true Antarctic penguins. The other 2 species around here, Gentoos and chinstraps, are actually sub-Antarctic penguins. So these are true Antarctics. The other ones, so we're kind of getting toward the northern end of Adelie range, but we're actually at the southern end of Gentoo and chinstrap penguin range. Adelie penguins right now are weeks left to go before chicks fledge from the nest and become independent. Let's see, they lay 2 eggs. We tell males and females apart based mostly on size, and when you see what you have to do to tell them apart is see the male and the female standing side by side. We look at various things throughout the season, like when they lay their eggs, when they hatch, so those give us important markers on the chronology of what's happening. We put satellite transmitters on them, and I think Josh will probably talk more about that later, about how that fits into what you're seeing.
That's right. That's the key piece of information that we need to understand where the penguins are going, and they actually tell us where the interesting parts of the ocean are.
Absolutely. So getting back to Torgerson Island, what you are seeing is a very, very wet day in guano land. That is, we affectionately call that guano mud, and I wish there was a way to let you know just how stinky it is, but suffice to say it's stinky. I can see some penguins that are displaying to each other, and you should also watch for the uniformly now and within 10 days of fledging from the island, from their nest area. The chicks right now are in crash phase, which means that there are several chicks being guarded by very few adults. And I'm looking specifically to see if we can see a behavior to point out. I see a couple of adults displaying, so they're waving their flippers a little bit, neck is in the air. I see a couple that are preening. But really it's kind of a routine that they have, that they go out and they forage, come back, they display at their nest, they call, and they have vocal recognition between the adults and the chicks. So that's how the chicks rush out and find their parents during this crush phase.
That's related to a question we just came in, and I'd like
great.
to get to a couple of the questions that people have been sending in. We've been getting quite a few, so thanks, and please keep typing those into the chat window. We have a question about how do penguins, I think because they look so similar, how do penguins find their mates? How
Absolutely.
They tell each other apart? That's
a great question. They all pretty much look the same, absolutely identical.
I can't tell the difference.
I can't tell the difference. So penguins, they have vocal recognition between each adult and also between the they call from the edge of the colony, and the chicks will rush out and greet them during crush phase. Before crush phase, when they're still sitting in their nests, they will still return to the nest site, the actual nest where they laid the eggs, call to the chicks, and they'll still do quite a bit of displaying and vocal recognition. So that is a super question. A long time, maybe 15 years ago, we quit putting metal flipper bands on penguins. When we used those metal flipper bands, that was the surefire way to tell who was who. But there was some research that suggested that having a flipper band would be like putting a very heavy bangle bracelet on an Olympic swimmer. Probably would not affect them for a day or 2 days or a week, but after a while, that carrying extra weight might affect their ability to perform. And so we're very sensitive to not wanting to add that extra bit of disturbance. And actually, we did remove all of the flipper bands. So we have to go by where they're located and the clues like those to figure out who they are.
But do you know something about how long penguins stay together as a pair?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, they're mostly monogamous, but sometimes there are mate swaps. That happens. And occasionally they do change partners. Mostly they stay together for their, they don't start breeding until they're 4 to 5 years old, and they will mostly stay together for their lifespan, which in the wild here is about 10 to 12 years. You do see epic battles, though, when an extra female comes to visit, and sometimes penguins can be very harsh with each other. What are we seeing here? I am seeing a parent feeding a chick. If you look right in the center, that parent is calling, it's vocalizing, and now it is getting ready to feed the chick. When a pair of Adelie penguins are raising 2 chicks, that's quite a demand of energy to continue feeding them. And it's important for them to get the best meal possible. There you go. There's a parent feeding a chick right in the center. Yeah, which brings up, I mean, how far are they going to forage? What are your robots telling us about that?
The tracks that we've been looking at, Donna and her team have been tracking the gliders using these small transmitters that are put for a day or 2, sometimes 3 days on an individual penguin before it's swapped to another penguin. And when we see those penguins go out to forage, sometimes they don't go very far. We're right here, we can see Torgerson very clearly from where we're standing, and so when they can travel quite far, just beyond where we are right now is a large canyon. It's called Palmer Deep, and it's about 3,000 feet deep, not very far from here, and it actually is really productive. There's a lot of phytoplankton blooms that occur here in the summer, and the zooplankton, which is the krill, which is one of the main prey species for Adelies, is right there eating those phytoplankton. And so the penguins can travel quite far, maybe 14 miles or so would be their furthest, which could last 7-8 hours where they're away from the colony.
Absolutely.
Thanks. And Josh, we have another question about the oceanography that's sort of contributing to feed these penguins. So you think that the food is sort of concentrated or moved around at least by currents, and the question is, do the currents stay steady year round?
Oh, that's a good question. That's exactly what we're after. We have different technologies that we use to measure the currents in this area. One is the waters that the penguins are telling us to go patrol, and then we also have a radar system that we use. It's used extensively in the U.S. and around the world for coastal applications, but hasn't really been used much in Antarctica because it requires power and communication, and we found a way working with great researchers at University of Alaska Fairbanks, one of our project team members, where they've put this system out, and it gives us maps of currents every hour. And we see in those maps that the currents change very frequently. They're changing by the hour, by the day, and what we're trying to do is understand which currents that are changing at what scale are important to the penguins. And that's exactly what we're after. We don't have the answers yet. We just know that it's changing.
Great. And I think we just moved the view around so you can look at our viewers, Donna, which is, what is the average colony size of an Adelie penguin?
Okay, so that's a really good question, because the average colony size varies widely around here. Anything from about 10 pairs to 600 or 700 pairs. And these are colonial seabirds, so they do best when they are in a colony structure, and they have that, as you can see in what you're looking at right now, there's a little bit less structure because we're in crash phase, but during the early part of the season, there is protection as far in being in a colony structure. So the nests that are not quite on the periphery or the edge, but that are farther into the colony, give a little bit more protection from skuas, the land-based predators.
Yeah, so maybe you could talk a little bit about what are those predators?
Absolutely. Adelie penguins have challenges both on land and at sea, just like gentoos and chinstrap penguins as well. On land, they are badgered relentlessly by south polar and brown skuas. Mainly brown skuas are the penguin predators in this area. Or they also look for chicks that are either starving or not healthy, or unattended a little bit too early. But when they're in this crash phase, as you're seeing on the penguin cam right now, there are adults that are guarding the periphery of the colony.
And are the adults in danger from skuas?
Absolutely, yes. They not as much as the chicks, but if there's an adult that's been injured or not doing so well, they could be taken out by a brown skua.
Just remind us what a skua looks like.
Okay.
You may see some birds flying in the background.
Absolutely. You might see some. They are large, they're brown, they have white stripes on their wings and their tails, and they're in the gull family, so they're like predatory gulls. And they're about a 4-foot wingspan, and their body size is roughly 3 pounds. So fairly large bird, and we've just been seeing them to carry off eggs that never did hatch, because we did have some nest flood early in the spring. So they're still finding eggs around here. And I know it's hard for us to see sometimes the predators working a colony, but then we also have to remember as ecologists that those skuas are actually feeding their own babies. So it's hard to see, but it's kind of a necessary thing around a colony.
And that's one of the interesting things about Adelies too, since they don't fly, they're actually quite heavy, big birds, so they actually outweigh skuas.
And most of them weigh 10-ish pounds, and skuas at 3 pounds are just a little bit more adept at sneaking in for an attack on an egg or a small chick, even a large chick, and so yeah, they do have quite a few challenges on land. Occasionally, giant petrels will get in there and try and scavenge, and giant petrels are much bigger than skuas, so they'll just get in there and steal their food, which is wonderful.
But
and
you know, as a longtime penguin biologist, that penguins definitely have their defenses, right?
Absolutely. Penguins are solid muscle, and they tend to be they've got keen aim with their flippers, and they do run out and chase skuas off, so they try and defend their nest sites. In the water, you mentioned the predators and the problems that penguins have. In the water, their main predator is the leopard seal, and so the leopard seals, they'll pulse in and out of the area. Some days we see them, we'll go for a while without seeing them, then you may see 5 or 6 in a day. And then they just try and wait to ambush penguins as they leave. Sometimes the leopard seals will sit very close to the surf line, and penguins as they're coming and going from foraging. So I'm not. Oh, okay. There's if you look at the penguin cam right now, you can see an Adelie penguin walking along. They're far more agile in the water than they are on land, but There you go. There's a closer view. And yeah, when they return from foraging, sometimes they land on the opposite side of the island, so they've got quite a bit of a walk to get home to their nest. And amazingly enough, they have they have the internal GPS to figure out exactly where that nest is throughout the whole season. In fact, return to the same nesting colonies year after year.
Yeah, so they often come back. Is this right? So where they were born is most likely where they're going to come
Absolutely.
back. Absolutely,
absolutely. They'll typically come back not only to the same island but within the same colony, and we do know that from when we had banded birds and we could see them returning to the area. It's very rare that they would return to a different island. So mostly.
So this is a chick that might have how many years later?
4 to 5 years, we find.
Same spot.
Yeah, and actually that brings up a good point, Hugh, that to mention that some of the birds that are standing around that you can see in the penguin cam actually might not even be breeders from this season. They may be non-breeders or young birds that are setting up shop and trying to learn their way around. You'll see birds, even this time of the year, collecting rocks and building nests. And it may seem a little bit silly because they're not going to nest until next October or November. But what they're doing is they're practicing in order to secure a position, to find a mate, to learn how to do the calls they need, and get ready as best they can for next season.
We had a really interesting question just a few minutes ago come in because you showed the guano gravy and talked about the incredible smell of the colony. And somebody asked, well, why don't penguins get sick when they're walking around in their own guano?
I'm going to guess that's a great shot of the guano pile. Thanks, Chris, for that. I wish I could get everybody a little closer. I don't think that they get sick because there's likely not much for bacteria in there. I mean, all that is recycled krill. We're in a very cold environment, so it's not like a hot tropical area that you would have different germs and things festering there. We very rarely see penguins that are sick. In fact, it's very incredibly rare. There have been a couple of outbreaks of avian cholera, which is naturally occurring in all bird populations, so it's not specific to Antarctica at all. But mostly they are...
Near a colony yesterday, and I was affected
that?
by it.
I bet your pants were affected by it too.
Yeah, I had to wash everything
twice
just from standing near it.
I think my hands will smell forever.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time trying to think up ways to describe that smell.
Boy, it is amazing.
Gosh,
Yeah.
it's horrible. Yeah, so you can actually see that quite a few of those adults, and definitely the chicks, are not immune to getting their own pants dirty.
No.
And boots.
Yeah, I thought it was bad just being here on station and the wind would come from Torgerson and you could smell it.
Don't blame the penguins. Those
boy,
are elephant seals that do that.
When you get on that island.
It's heinous. Yeah, so let's see what else we can see here. I'm thinking that...
Describe what a penguin nest is or what it's made of.
Oh, yeah. Penguins in other areas may use things like grasses and vegetation, but here we don't have that much grass and vegetation available where the penguin colonies are. So all of the penguin nests here, all 3 species, make rock nests. And early on in the spring season, when they're just starting to nest, rocks are almost this commodity that are hard to come by. So there's quite a bit of rock thieving that goes on then. Right now, rocks are plentiful, and in crush phase, there's not a lot of demand to steal rocks, but they still do it.
Will nests survive a winter?
No, not really. They have to rebuild their house every year. And I think we are looking again a close-up at a colony. There's a bird, just popped up. A bird walking past, thanks. And let's see, what else is going on? Some chick feeding. And I'm really not seeing a whole lot that's going on there. Dirty birds, guano. Yeah, it's kind of a typical day in the Adelie penguin colony at this time of the year.
And we had a question from a viewer about are there more chicks than adults? And I guess that's also the question of what's their clutch size? How do they...
Absolutely, that's a really good question because during the early part of the season, you'll have a nest structure where they will lay 2 eggs, and they'll lay 2 eggs. They incubate for just over 1 month, and during that time, the males and the females the mate that's out can be out foraging. They lay 2 eggs, and when both chicks hatch, they will be fed by both parents. And at this time of the year, some of the colonies may actually have more chicks than adults because we're in that crush phase where you have very few adults guarding a lot of chicks. Now, you're probably looking at this penguin cam thinking that I've lost my mind, because I think that there are more adults there than chicks, but that changes throughout the day, and it also changes with what Josh said about we're seeing penguins foraging so close to station. Those foraging trips are so short that they're actually able to go out, fill their bellies, and get back and provision their chicks. So we're seeing a lot more adults here, which agrees with what you're seeing, doesn't it?
Yeah, we've seen them a lot closer to basically all summer, except Adeles early on in the month, and then we started seeing them move a little bit further away, and now you switch to gentoos for tagging, right? And we're seeing the gentoos go very far out.
Absolutely.
They're going much further out into the canyon, at least over the last week.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that actually brings up some interesting questions about the different species of penguins, and we also had a question that just came in that asked, evolutionarily, about how long have these penguins been around?
A long time. I don't know evolutionarily how long. I mean, the oldest fossil penguin was the 6-footer, and we're way beyond that. Adeles, chinstraps, and gentoos are so closely related. They're same genus, different species. But I'm sorry, I can't quite get into the exact evolutionary history of them.
Small number of millions of years.
Small numbers of millions of years. And now back to the penguin camera, where you see a bird returning from foraging.
Perhaps the Adeles, the gentoos, and the chinstraps are really closely related. So what are the differences between them?
Oh, that's a super question. What the difference is between the 3 species of penguins we have here is that, like I said, they're closely related. They have similar habitat in that all 3 species make rock nests. They all are found locally. Adeles are the only true Antarctic of the 3 species. Gentoos are sub-Antarctic, and chinnies are Antarctic. But more found to the north. So we're kind of the southern end of the chinstrap range. All 3 species have about a month-long incubation. All 3 will lay 2 eggs in a clutch. Sometimes they can relay a 3rd egg, but only if something happens to the 2nd egg pretty quickly, and the female can relay that 3rd egg before she goes out to forage. Gentoos, chinstraps, and Adeles all are dependent on krill, the Antarctic krill. They're like little shrimp, little miniature shrimp, and the gentoos will supplement their diet with quite a bit of fish. And actually that's a change that we've seen here in the last 30 years or so, is less fish in an Adelie penguin's diet, and more fish found typically in a gentoo penguin's diet. So there's some differences there. And also the timing of their breeding is that Adeles are the first ones to hit the rocks there, literally and figuratively, and get breeding. Gentoos have a much looser chronology, which means that there's a wider spread in when they lay their eggs and get things moving. And chinstraps actually lay a couple, 2 to 3 weeks later than Adeles. And what that allows them to do is wait until most of the snow is melted on the islands, and that's beneficial to them. Also, though, if in the colonies where chinstraps and Adeles are mixed, the chinstraps are then relegated to kind of the periphery or the edge, but at the same time they're a little bit more vulnerable to predators. Gentoos have the best of both worlds, where they can lay a little bit later, they're a lot more flexible in their breeding, and they tend to have a better success in that they're not as hardwired into their breeding chronology as Adelie penguins.
And so around here, I think you have some strong results about changes in populations particularly the Adeles and the gentoos.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very good point. When the seabird breeding study started here in 1974, what we saw was about more than 15,000 pairs of Adelie penguins, and at this point we're down to less than 2,000 pairs. So it had decreased by over 80% in the local population. And that trend is not specific to Palmer Station. I want to mention that, don't raise the red flag. No alarm bells here. It's okay. Into more of that genuine Antarctic habitat and more of an Antarctic climate than we're having here, you do see Adelie penguin populations that are stronger and not having that strong decrease that we see locally. Gentoo populations, on the other hand, have increased from nothing to over 3,500 pairs in the local area, in one nesting area south of the station by about 8 miles. And gentoos don't necessarily migrate off of their colonies, so they tend to be in areas that have more reliable open water, which is near one of our Kodar sites, where we have the things that Josh was describing earlier.
Right.
So that actually kind of brings up a question that I've been wanting to ask that was sent in by Anders and Henrik Axelson in Ithaca, New York.
Fantastic.
And their question is climate change hurting penguins in Antarctica?
Yes, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. And what we're seeing, just what I spoke just a second ago about the drastic population decrease because of a lack of winter sea ice. The winter sea ice season, when it builds up, it advances and then it retreats. The Adelie penguins need that sea ice habitat for overwinter survival, not just for them, but for the krill that they're dependent on. So that this winter sea ice provides habitat for krill as well as Adelie penguins. And Adelie penguins typically have to travel farther during winter to find that habitat. So yes, climate change has impacted Adelie penguins quite a bit. And it had, so in a bad way, and in a good way, it's allowing things like a gentoo penguin to increase its range and expand into this area. So gentoo penguins have gone, as I just mentioned,
And about how much time is that happening?
just about 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah, so, and I think you were telling me about a few days ago about you were kind of there when they first arrived.
We were quite surprised to see the first 14 pairs of gentoo penguins and thought, oh, this is just amazing, yay, something new, and this is exciting. And then it just became even more exciting as their numbers increased dramatically. And now gentoo penguins pretty much have taken over Biscoe Point. So it's an interesting change. And during my short tenure here, to see these enormous changes in the wildlife populations and in the landscape and what we're seeing, and of course what the different researchers seeing it below the waterline and above the waterline. So it's quite different.
And you talked about how the Adelie penguins use sea ice, winter sea ice, and that brings up that question of year.
Absolutely. Adelie penguins stay around the Palmer Station area from October when they start courtship and they start their nest building, and they're getting ready for the breeding season. The month of incubation, 2 months of chick rearing. Then they actually leave the area once their chicks are independent or fledged from the nest. The parents quit provisioning them, and then the parents will actually go off and get fattened up. They'll go out and find a good restaurant close by, good krill patch or two, and they'll gain quite a bit of weight in order to come back to land and go through an entire body molt where they molt off every one of their feathers and bring in a fresh set of waterproof feathers to get them through the next year. So that covers about 5 months actually of the year. And then once they're done with their molt, it's time for them to start heading south and find that winter sea ice habitat.
So can you just describe that a little bit? It seems strange. We're in the southern hemisphere, so a migratory bird you might think would fly north, just like our birds in the northern hemisphere fly south. So why do the Adelies?
Now they have to go south in order to find more of a winter Antarctic habitat, and then that sea ice is what's giving kind of a nursery structure for juvenile krill. And Adelie penguins will get under the sea ice during winter and forage on the krill that are under there, and then they use that sea ice as a kind of a habitat platform to haul out on at night. And of course, wintertime, the days are much shorter here, and so they have to be able to get under that ice, forage very efficiently, and get out when it's dark, because then they can't quite find their prey.
And that actually brings up another question for Josh, which is, can you just give us a refresher on the difference between a glacier, an iceberg, and sea ice?
Yeah, so when Donna gave that really great tour of the area, she showed you island, and so that's extremely old snow that has been weighted down, and it actually compresses and forms this beautiful blue glacial ice. Very, very cold, very, very big, and what happens is occasionally ice from those glaciers breaks off. We call it calving, and it goes into the water, and those are what form the big icebergs. And the one that Donna also pointed out just to our left, there's a huge iceberg out there that is many hundreds of feet tall, going from the bottom all the way up to the surface with the water line kind of in between. And so those are glacial ice that have broken off and are drifting around with the currents. And then sea ice is ice that forms each year when the weather turns towards the winter and gets colder. And so it is seawater that freezes, and then in the summer and the spring it melts and goes back in. So it's not new fresh water that's coming in. It's actually just the surface here has gotten much shorter that season. Over the last 40 years, we've seen it reduced by 90 days. So it's actually 3 months shorter. And it's not unusual for this area not to see any sea ice at all. In fact, the last 2 seasons, we didn't see any sea ice. And so those are the big differences between that different types of ice.
Thanks. So in terms of thinking about habitat for adelies, and Don has been telling us about how they use this winter habitat, and maybe it sounds strange because there's no land involved, right? But there's a huge amount of sea ice that forms, even if the total amount it has been getting smaller. Is that true?
Yeah, every winter, Antarctica just about doubles in size.
Wow.
When the sea ice forms around the continent, it reaches well north in different areas. This area on the peninsula is actually seeing a decline. And so it's unusual from what we're seeing in other parts of Antarctica. This part of the peninsula that's sticking north into the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, which is actually a warm current, is seeing a drastic reduction in sea ice, in winter sea ice.
And I wanted to point something out, if that's okay.
Yeah.
That what you're seeing on the penguin cam right now, you're seeing a few different things. There's some adults in the very, very back that are displaying, and they're getting their chicks to chase them. And during the crash, I think I've mentioned already that they have feeding chases. The parents, and then you see up center, and there it's displaying, but it's already run away from that chick a couple of times. And you may think, what are you doing? You're supposed to feed that chick, don't run away from it. But what's Chris Linder doing with the camera? Go back down, please. Yeah, and they're doing, thank you. They're doing that in order to ensure that they're feeding their own chicks, because they're no longer at a specific nest site, so they have to make sure that those are their own babies. And you see that they're doing that quite a few times, and adelies aren't really big thinkers, but what they're doing is they're absolutely ensuring that they're feeding their own chicks and provisioning them. And I might mention that a little earlier, I was able to see a fledgling, not quite fledged yet, but they're mostly dark. You saw this last night.
Yeah.
Mostly dark gray, and they're completely covered with very warm, fuzzy down that is a little bit guano encrusted today. So they may look dirty to you, and they are.
It was yesterday too.
Were they dirty? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then what you might see are some of those chicks that are starting to look a little bit splotchy or mottled with their down. A penguin won't go in the water until it has a full set of feathers, and they have no more of that gray, that dark gray down, like your coat. Mm-hmm. No more of that dark gray down all over their bodies. And thank you, Chris. That might be a great view to see. Oh, and there goes a penguin chasing another one away. They also defend their nest sites, which is a little kooky, but they are really rabid about defending their nest sites and building those nests, even though it's not quite the right time of the year. And keep watching, because you'll see some chicks in there, hopefully, that have some of their feathers coming in. And you can see that a penguin colony is quite a busy place. So there's non-stop activity.
Right now, about penguins live really closely together, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're friendly with each other all the time.
Oh, they're quite mean. Did you see some fights last night?
We did see some
Absolutely.
fights, yeah.
They fight like none other. So yeah, an Adelie penguin colony, I like to say that they're very type A, very regimented, like a generic penguin, black and white. And
we should say that Donna's favorite penguin is the Gentoo penguin. The secret's out.
The Adelie penguin. But okay, there in the upper right corner, you can actually see a chick you can see that where its feathers are actually coming through the down. And there is a dead center in the frame, a penguin standing as straight and tall as it can. Head is up in the air, and its flippers are waving. That is a display of ownership. Do that throughout, like I mentioned, even if they're practicing for next season. Adelie penguins are kind of hard and fast type A, very hardwired to about a 1 meter squared space for their nest sites. And they do defend their colony spaces quite adamantly.
And you mentioned that they're made of rocks, and we had a question asked about, do they just pile them up, or do they cement them somehow?
It's just a big old rock pile. It's just a pile of rocks that it's rather messy.
And you said that this was an unusually deep snow year, and it was actually hard for them to build their nests. Why was that?
It was hard because the nests were buried in the colony areas, and Adelie penguins, as I just mentioned, they're super hardwired and they have a high site tenacity, which means that even if there's 2 feet or 4 feet or 10 feet of snow on top of their colony space, they won't move. They will just nest in that one spot. So we've actually seen them stand there and literally melt the snow kind of down to the ground, and they won't go to a different spot. So that wherever it is they want to go, they're not going to be free thinkers and move somewhere else with less snow. The other thing that happens is even in a year when we have not quite so much spring snow, but you get these blizzards that happen, is that a penguin will be sitting incubating their eggs on a rock nest, and a blizzard will come through and we've seen entire colonies buried underneath the snow, which is pretty interesting to go out there and there's just a little penguin beak sticking out through the snow, and they don't abandon their nest. They just sit there on the under the snow and gradually will melt out of that snow.
They're very dedicated.
Absolutely. Give them credit for that.
And just to say, we're starting to wind down. We have about 10 minutes left, I think, and so please, we'll keep entering your questions and we'll try to answer as many as we have time for. We had the question about, can penguins eat anything other than fish, squid, and krill?
They can eat other things. They eat amphipods. Occasionally we'll find some mollusk shells in their diets. It's not that they can or can't, and what they will run into or swim into when they're foraging will, most of the time, 95% of the time, will be krill. Occasionally they'll find some fish, and for them that's like finding a steak in the bottom of the popcorn bowl where they otherwise would have to forage for individual krill, but a fish will provide them with quite a bit more energy. So it really is the best thing for them to do to continue with what's out there.
Okay, another few questions
Absolutely.
coming in. What % of chicks make it to adulthood?
About 20%. It's survival is hard the first year, mainly because when the parents quit provisioning their chicks, and whatever the signal is, chick development, to go out and molt and get ready for winter, when the chicks are done being provisioned, the adults will actually just leave. So when chicks get to go down to the beach, there's no swim lessons, there's no dive lessons. So penguins actually will make their way down to the beach, stand there with other penguin chicks, and wait for one to jump in, and whatever their signal is, time to go. They tend to bob around a little bit, and then they'll start to learn how to dive, and we hope that they learn how to forage pretty quickly because their parents will give them that one last feed, and then that's it until they can get out and learn how to provision themselves.
Great, thanks. And we have another question getting back to the interesting dynamic between Adelies and Gentus, and asking, are Gentoo penguins considered invasive species?
No, they're not considered. That's a really good question. I guess depends on the way you look at it. Gentoo penguins would not be an invasive species because they are actually native to the Antarctic Peninsula. If it was something that moved down here from South America or from a different ending its range. So they are found on the peninsula, just expanding their range southward, where Adelie penguins are true Antarctic birds, and we're in the northern end of their range. The entire Antarctic Peninsula is their breeding range, plus the Antarctic continent. So it's getting harder for Adelie penguins to make their way here, but easier for species that are more adapted to sub-Antarctic conditions like a Gentoo penguin. So it's a really good question, though.
Great. A couple more questions
Sure.
coming in. Some viewers were really fascinated by the story of incubating during a blizzard and getting buried, and they wondered, can they breathe under the snow, and do they get trapped there?
Yes, they can breathe. So incubating during a blizzard has got to be fairly hard for them, but they just are able to wait it out. And eventually, the head will be in the air, and you'll see a little breathing hole form, and it's not fatal to the parents. And they are very dedicated, as Josh said, about staying on top of those eggs.
So the danger then is what those eggs are resting on?
No, because they're actually, the Adelie penguins, it would be hard to see, I think, on the video here, the penguin cam, but they actually have a brood patch. So it's a split in the, so that's what will keep those eggs warm the entire time. Just like an emperor penguin holds an egg on its foot, and it's engulfed in their own, basically, their bellies. the same thing happens with the Delhi penguins. So the eggs are being kept warm. The bad part about blizzards and kind of the aftermath of blizzards is when that snow melts. If it melts an entire colony area, we do see a lot of nests and colony areas that get flooded.
And that's bad for
And
eggs.
that is bad. Sometimes you see eggs bobbing, although if it's fairly early in the incubation, we have actually seen nests that were flooded hatch and raise chicks successfully.
And that actually happened this year. Is
That
right?
did happen this year. Yes, it did. So we did see quite a few that succeeded despite the blizzards.
So that's amazing, because you think about one of the main jobs of an incubating bird is to keep that egg warm, and this is kind of like, imagine putting an egg into your refrigerator,
Right.
and keeping it in ice water for a couple of days or a week and still hatch.
Right, absolutely. And so they do a phenomenal job of making it all work out.
Great. Another question, going back to their foraging behavior or their life out at sea during the winter, and then do they spend all of their time in the water?
Not quite all of their time during winter, not quite all of winter, and they need that sea ice habitat in order to make all of that work. Yeah, but foraging it's pretty demanding, energetically.
And that happens all winter. There's not a time where they just sort of go dormant
They
trying
can't-
to get through the...
No vacation time.
Okay, so no
Yeah.
hibernating.
No
Yeah.
hibernating, no vacation. They have to forage for their food every day.
Yeah, so somebody was interested in that statistic of 20% of chicks surviving, and so the question is kind of a sad thing to contemplate, but 80% of those chicks are probably not going to make it to adulthood, and
Right.
why is that?
Mainly, the reason for that chick mortality or low survival, and that's true of most species, that the lowest survival is between 0 and 1. So it's not specific just to Adelie penguins. But basically, if a penguin fledgling is being fed and provisioned by the parents, and it's hard for the parents to go out and fill up their bellies, let's say if they have to go forage a long ways, or if their prey field, the krill and the fish, if they're very interspersed in the water column and it takes longer to forage, then those chicks are not going to gain the weight that they need in order to get out and how to swim. So really it has quite a lot to do with the condition of the penguin chicks as they're getting ready to fledge and be independent from the nest.
I just quickly want to answer a couple of questions about just what is it like to live on Palmer Station. So maybe first of all you can say, do you get time to do things for fun? Do you miss your family?
Sure. It's very... it's great to be part of the community down here while we're working. We all get along really, really well. We're helping each other out. We're doing the science. At some point, you're so busy doing that. It's very, very long days. You get back, you're kind of exhausted, but there's still plenty of opportunities to watch movies, to hang out with the people that are here in the community. There's a band that's formed, so they're practicing most nights. But we, of course, miss we have an internet connection that's good enough to be able to stream live to you from here, and it's also good enough for us to keep in touch with our family through emails, through phone calls, through video chats. I can take this opportunity to wish a very happy birthday to my wife, who tomorrow turns, I won't say how old, dear,
29.
but 29, right,
yeah.
29. And so it's great to take advantage of that. We miss our families when we're here, but we can stay in touch with them, and we're always thinking about them and sharing with them the great stuff that we see as we're here.
Absolutely. I'll follow up with what Josh said, which is all true, but also that the community here is incredibly important. And I tell people that when we're home, we parent with intensity. When we're gone with intensity. And long days, lots of work, but amazing community. And I can't emphasize how important it is to have this kind of structure here, which makes it easier for us to do our work. But also, we have these amazing field teams. Without them, we would not be able to do these jobs because nothing gets done here by yourself. And to do, there's a lot to keep us busy. And yes, we miss our families. Christopher, I miss my son. And yeah, it's a great place to be. And then when we go home, it's a great place to think about and be glad that we were here.
Yeah.
Well, great. We're just about at the end of our time here. I want to say thanks to everybody who watched and to everybody who sent in your great questions. and we really enjoyed answering them. And hope you got to see some interesting behavior and feel like you know Adelie penguins a little bit better than you did. I also definitely want to thank the Office of Polar Programs at the National Science Foundation and the IT staff at Palmer Station and the BirdCam staff at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. The last thing that we're going to do here is I think we're going to bring the camera around. Are we there? And we're just going to zoom in on the upstairs of Palmer Station's GWR building. We hope you can see us, and we just want to say goodbye and thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy birthday, Courtney.
Good save, Josh. Excuse me, John.
All right, thank you very much. We've enjoyed this, and we will see you next time.